Hey, Danny, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. So, for those of you who haven't met Danny yet, Danny Hedlund published her first novel, Threads of Deception, at the age of 18. Experiencing the difficulties of breaking into the market, she founded Tethered by Letters in 2007 to help other new writers perfect and publish their work. Her nonprofit offers free writing coaching, editing, and publishing guidance, and she expanded it into a global community of writers, editors, and artists all over the world. Danny, it's great to have you.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, same here. So tell us about your background, and I know you wrote this novel at a very young age. So tell us about that.
Well, essentially, when I was a stupid 15-year-old, I got really obsessed with string theory, as you do as a 15-year-old. And I was reading a lot of Tolkien and Lewis and Pullman at the time, and I thought, oh, what the hell? Like, what else are you going to do after cheerleading practice? Very practical thought people have. So I wrote this book, and then I finished it when I turned 16. And I had no idea what to do with it. I was raised in a farming community. Like, people didn't go to college. People didn't read. So going around to my network and being like, hey, I wrote this fantasy novel about physics. What do you think I should do with it? No one had any idea. So I just spent 2 years trying to get anyone in the industry to take me seriously, from agents to editors. And by the time I finally, got to see my name on the spine of a book and fondle it obsessively in a bookstore, what I was really focused on wasn't the achievement, but how many times I had almost given up, how many times I had thought to myself, maybe the industry will never accept new people. Maybe new writers don't have a chance. Maybe you shouldn't write books about physics. So when I was 19, I got this really, again, ridiculous idea that I should start a nonprofit that helps writers, especially new writers, navigate this space, and makes the seemingly impenetrable industry a little bit easier to access and a little bit less lonely. So yeah, I started Tethered by Letters when I was a teenager, and much like the novel, I had no idea what I was doing, but I just floundered around until things kind of stuck. And yeah, now it's a global nonprofit, and we help writers all over the world, and we publish this really great nationally distributed journal. And yeah, I mean, we're all, fighting the good fight, and it's hard and it's ridiculous, but yeah, we love it.
Awesome. So what would you say, when you were starting out, what was like really the biggest challenge for you?
As a writer, well, honestly, I didn't really know how to write, which is a big problem. I think when you're starting out, you get a kind of love affair with writing. You sit down and you make up these imagined worlds and you pour so much into it, and it's honestly just a labor of love. And the more you learn about writing and the better you get at your craft, the more that love turns into a job. And you enter the editing process, and things start to hurt a great deal. And there was a long time in which I thought that kind of hurt you feel, like where you're like, oh, do I really want to sit down? Do I want to do this? I could be doing any other thing. I used to think it was a sign that, maybe I shouldn't write then. I was always kind of waiting for my muse. And then around my mid-20s, after I had floundered around a little bit longer, I came to the terrible realization that, there was never a time in which the muse was going to come on its own and make a practical career out of that. And you just had to sit down and be open to it and put the hard time in and put your butt in the chair for a couple hours every day and, be a professional about it. And that was the hardest lesson for me to learn. But it was the most valuable thing I've ever learned as a writer. And it applies to running a business, or honestly doing anything, like having a successful relationship, not becoming addicted to coffee, like anything. It's just sitting down and doing the work and not being a pansy about it.
Absolutely. So tell us about your nonprofit. I mean, what kind of work do you guys do? What is really your mission?
So our mission at its very core is to help new creators reach their potential. And we do that in a whole bunch of different ways. The first program that Tethered by Letters ever launched was called the Free Editing Program, and it's still our largest program. Like the title implies, we give free edits to people. So essentially, as a new writer, you're trying to build a platform, because that's what agents want. It used to be back in the 80s, an agent read a query letter, and if you had a good pitch and you had a good story idea, the agent read your pages. But now the market is so inundated that the agent skims down to the third paragraph and they look for who else has published you, literary journals, anthologies, anyone else who's taken a chance, so they can be like, okay, like it's a better investment. And so that means that new writers are going out and they're submitting to literary journals, they're submitting to all these places, and they're pretty much just getting blanket rejections. It's dear author, they don't even put your name in there. This just doesn't fit our aesthetic. And you don't know what that means. Like, that could mean, hey, it's 98% there, but something's off and we don't want that. Or it means that's the worst thing I've ever read. Like, I literally had to hold back vomit while reading it. But you don't know, because it just says, dear author, this doesn't fit our aesthetic. So when we started the free editing program, what we really wanted to do is we wanted to cast an anchor out into that darkness, just so an author knows where they are. Is it C quality? Is it B quality? Do my characters not make sense? Am I writing in sentences that aren't grammatically correct to the point where editors are crying? So we started this program where I essentially just browbeat all the professional editors I knew into donating a certain amount of hours every week. And it used to be we'd shop, a couple dozen authors every year, and we'll almost shop 2,000 this year. So it's grown incredibly quickly. It's what most of my staff does, is we just read submissions from authors around the world, and we help them get those works to a point where they can be published. Or we tell them, hey, you need to start over. This will never make any sense. So from there, there's a whole education sector. I lecture in high schools and colleges on 4 different continents, which is super fun. I love scaring co-eds. We also have all of these resources on our website, and that's everything from how to write a query letter to what the hell is publishing credit to, just kind of the easy ins and outs of the industry. And it answers small questions, essentially like, why do agents want a certain thing? Like, why should I not use rhetorical questions? That sort of thing. And then we have a community division, which we launched a few years ago, which essentially just makes literature fun. We hold cool reading events, and we go to a whole bunch of other events. I spend so much time at Comic-Con, it's kind of ludicrous. And yes, that's just about fostering a love of literature. And we also just connect people with other people that care about literature. And that's if you need to connect with an editor, you just need a good writing group, or you need someone else who really cares about like Foucault's decomposition, like that's fun. And then our division that pretty much everyone loves the most is the publishing division, where we put out this just gorgeous triannual collection of literature and art. And it's really special in the way that we're one of the only literary journals in the United States that is independent. So we're not nestled with a university, which means we can publish whatever the hell we want, which is really exciting. But we also publish genre work, which is very uncommon for a literary journal. We publish sci-fi and like really cool fantasy. We have a comic in every issue, and it's just great storytelling at its best. So that opens up a way for genre writers to get that publishing credit that's almost impossible for them to get otherwise, because literary journals just don't publish genre work. And we love genre. We're all super geeks. So that's essentially all of the company. And I know it's very confusing, and I should really have a diagram.
That's awesome. So, obviously you guys are doing a lot of great work. And so I just want to clarify some things for our listeners, because I know a lot of them are going to be really interested in your programs, especially like your free editing program and all the educational resources you have. So do you guys only work with fiction?
We don't. We also work with poetry and nonfiction, and we do some comic editing, but we don't do any children's writing, because essentially none of us specialize in it, and it would be wrong for us to give you edits about something we don't understand.
Gotcha. So pretty much any writer, unless they're writing like children's picture books, they might be able to work with you.
I feel like you shouldn't send us erotica, but I actually have no idea what my editors are doing when I'm not watching them. So maybe we edit erotica. I don't really know.
Awesome. Cool. So, this thing has grown so big. So can you tell us about like your team? Is it like just you doing all this work?
So we have a staff of 18, not including like our artists or our authors or anyone that kind of works on like a commission basis with us. So I have a core group of 3 lieutenants that essentially make sure every part, the community, publishing, and education divisions don't die. And they're just the loveliest human beings I've ever met. I only hire through my internship program. So if you have a paid position with the company, it's because at one point you were a very frightened, doe-eyed intern. So yeah, I'm super blessed. Liam, Mia, and Stevie are just the best thing that a girl could ever ask for. And then under them, we have a whole slew of senior editors and then junior editors and then our interns. And then we variously just have people that help us because English majors shouldn't do web programming. So like my board is made up of people with practical life skills. They got real degrees and they're always here making sure things don't catch on fire. And yeah, so we have a really good team. And then we work with, oh goodness, like I said, about 2,000 students through the workshops every year. And we have an amazing group of artists we work with. And so all together, it's about 60 people that work for us and about a few thousand that we help every year.
Very cool. So how do you guys actually make money? I mean, does the publishing side of your business really fund the effort, or?
Oh, no. We could not survive without being a nonprofit. Our literary journal breaks even, which is actually incredibly exciting. I'm the only person I know who runs a journal that's not in debt, which apparently is like a really good standard. Because, you know, artists, I swear we shouldn't go into business. But yeah, we're about 95% privately funded. So a lot of that is going out into our communities and getting people excited about the work we do. And we have a big gala where we put on pencil dresses we don't understand. And then people who are much wealthier than us keep us going. And then a lot of people just give back. We're at a point now where a lot of the authors that we nurtured almost a decade ago are now getting big book deals and they're getting movie deals. And they're very wonderful about coming back and donating to the programs that helped them get their foot in the door. So we're just at the point now where that's coming in pretty regularly. And I mean, we're all living off of ramen noodles, but we read stories for a living. So I feel like we can't bitch.
Yeah, that's great. Very cool. So you mentioned, you know, some of your students, past students, have had these big successes. Can you tell us about some of those students? And I don't know if you can share specifics or not, but tell us about some successes of the people that you work with.
Yeah. Let me see what I'm terrible at figuring out what I can legally talk about. I'll talk about some of our debuts that we worked with. So probably the most popular person that we worked with for about 5 years now is Isaac Marion, who wrote Warm Bodies. When I first met Isaac, I want to say he was like installing air conditioning units or something ludicrous, like that tall, gangly, handsome gentleman under floorboards. But he's one of those really great cases of someone who had a passion for writing. He wrote his first book at 15 as well. He actually just came to our gala and spoke about it. It was good and amusing. Not the point. So yeah, he wrote this book when he was super young and then wrote like 3 books in his 20s that didn't go anywhere. He ended up self-publishing them and could never really find his momentum. And yeah, he wrote Warm Bodies initially just as a short story on his blog, and people were really excited about it. And he ended up selling the film rights before he sold the book rights, which is ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, he's exceptional in a lot of ways. They wrote this incredibly good genre book, but he's just an amazing short prose writer. So we're always happy to, you know, bring his short stories to print for the first time. And we're actually just doing a huge feature on him for our new journal for his second book. Well, I guess it's technically his 3rd book now. But yeah, he was one of those great people that we just kind of stumbled on at just the right time, where he had spent a good amount of years learning his talent and just kind of had to figure out how the business side of it worked. And that's honestly something we see a lot, which is really talented writers that have written something really good, but they're getting rejected by every agent out there because they can't figure out how to market the thing they've made, which is kind of a precarious situation for a lot of writers to be in. If you're used to spending, you know, 400 pages in a world and someone expects you to write 3 quippy sentences about it, and that's how you're going to sell your entire book, obviously that's an incredibly difficult transition. So we got lucky in a lot of our big celebrity names in which we were like, hey, your novel is pretty much perfect. Like, tighten up the beginning, and wow, that query letter is 5 pages long. What are you thinking? How about this paragraph? So yeah, we've had a lot of successes like that. For me, the people that hit most home are, you know, we get people that submit kind of out of nowhere, and they write something that's just insane. And we're like, okay, this is super brilliant, but we need to calm this down. And they work with our team sometimes up to for a year, and what they end up creating are usually my favorite things we publish. And, after they get published in Friction, they get to put that on their query letters. And when they get those first book deals where it's someone we got to, raise from the very beginning, like those are my favorites. We usually close every journal with our favorite debut, and we publish 30% brand new voices, which is kind of unheard of, but we're only able to do that because of our education program. We can walk them through the entire process, which not a lot of journals have the resources to do. So that's exciting. That was an incredibly long ramble. Do you want me to tighten that up in some way?
No, it's great. It's very good. So I know a lot of our listeners are probably really interested in your free editing program. So are there like rules about it? Like how does it work? Can anyone submit?
Yeah, anyone can submit. There's a word limit. So it's supposed to be things that you would submit to other literary journals or collections. So they're short stories, poetry suites, short nonfiction, short editorial work. I want to say it's under 6,000 words, which is what you should be writing anyway. Something that's incredibly hard for me because everything I write is 10,000 words, which is impossible to publish. So don't do that. So we're trying to keep everyone into the very publishable limit. But yeah, you submit one thing at a time. It gets sent to an editor. An editor will get back to you within 2 months. Usually we're quite fast, but the 2 months is nice for busy seasons. And yeah, we give you full feedback on it. And if every time you get a draft back, the work shows significant progress, we'll keep working with you on it, like for years. It's kind of insane. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's simple and straightforward.
Mm-hmm. And so what is the goal for client submits this work to be edited by you guys? What is your end goal for them? Like, what are you hoping that they achieve with that?
Well, our end goal is always selfish. We would really like to get great work for the journal that we put out. But a lot of times we end up, we'll get a work that's quite, like if something moves up to A quality, A or A plus, it gets pitched to me for the journal. And sometimes something just won't fit our aesthetic. Like it's incredibly good, but it doesn't have the right theme for what we're going for. And at that point, we just turn back to the author and we say, okay, this is great. It doesn't work for us, but here's 5 or 6 journals that we think it would really work well with. So our end goal is really just to get the author's work published somewhere and to make sure that they're building their career and they're building their platforms. And that happens if we've published a work from someone, it's best for them to get that work published in new places afterwards. Like you don't want to be like, I've published 5 things and they've all been with the same people. You want to really move that around. So a lot of times we just keep working with authors we've published so they can keep pushing that work out and keep getting bigger deals. And yeah, the end result is always find a good story, make it as good as it can be, find readers.
Awesome. And so for someone who's maybe like totally new to writing, has no idea how journals work or anything like that, can you tell us about that process? So are these journals paying writers? How does that work?
Well, the short form industry for publishing is really diverse. More than 90% of journals don't pay. We do pay. We're one of those rare exceptions. But I mean, we pay $10 a page, or for the big contest, it's like $1,000, which in terms of how long it takes us to write is just sad. But that's actually, I think we're in the 99th percentile for highest paid journal. So I always hear new writers being like, well, all I have to do to live as a writer is just to like win 1 or 2 contests a month. Like that can't be hard, right? And I cry inside because there was a 20-year-old version of myself that thought that. So really at this point, the money that you get from publishing, if you're lucky enough to publish, is kind of just to fuel your submission fees for other contests and just to build that reputation up so you can get an agent, because book deals and film deals are really the only money in the industry. This is all us kind of just putting in our time and getting someone to take a chance on us, which doesn't mean it's not worth it and isn't awesome. Like I love reading literary journals and I love submitting and getting published in them. It's a very different world. So essentially, you're a new writer. You want to get an agent to take a chance on you. So you're submitting to these places, and there's really great literary journals out there. There's the very traditional ones. You have Missouri and New Orleans and Pitch and all of those really fun, really just looking for classic literary fiction. But those will help launch your careers. Those are things that agents care about. There's the really big journals, the New Yorker, Paris, Hunger Mountain, that agents just read every issue that comes out. So if you write something that's great, you're going to get an email that's going to be like, hey, I loved this thing. Are you working on a book? Which is a very good way to go about getting an agent. And then there's so many literary journals out there, especially the online ones, that are really just built around, we want good stories, we want to share them with people. And those sort of things always help a career. It's every time you get published, it helps your career. But that's more just to kind of grow and to share and to build a fan base. So at this stage in a writer's career, it's just kind of about, collecting tokens and building them up and making sure at some point when you're the boss, you have enough weapons and you have enough money that you're going to get through it, to have a terrible video game reference. So that's kind of how this middle ground works. Unfortunately, it's very essential. But the great thing about it is that it teaches you how to write. I wish, for the love of God, that I would have written short stories before I wrote a novel. You learn pretty much all of the errors that you're making as a writer in a much more condensed, navigatable way when you're only writing something that's 5,000 words. When you're writing something that's 120,000 words, you've just spent several years of your life making all the same errors, and then, it's a couple years later and you realize you have to write it from scratch. That hurts. That hurts in a terrible, horrifying, crying on the floor sort of way. But a short story is like, well, okay, a couple months, maybe a month, a couple weeks, I can redo this without, having a mental breakdown and moving back in with my mom.
Absolutely. It's kind of like getting your MBA or like going through school. It's like, a much quicker, well, I don't know if that's a great metaphor, but it's just a much quicker way to actually learn the craft than, like you said, writing this, huge novel. And anytime you want to make an edit, everything else has to change too.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely I hear a lot of young writers really complaining about this middle ground space where you're submitting out short works, but honestly, just revel in it. Revel in the fact that you can complete something within like a month, because that's never going to happen to you again if you stay in this industry. Like, really enjoy that. You can finish something, you can discard it without your heart getting broken, and you can learn, you can try new things. It's very hard to grow as a writer in a novel world, other than, writing's always going to make you better. Regardless. But yeah, you'll grow faster and you'll grow in a less painful way if you just write some short stuff for a while and get the pain of rejection and then write some more stuff and then hurt a little bit more and then get your first acceptance and get incredibly drunk and then get hurt again. It'll be fine. It'll work out.
That's great. So have you found then that, writing these short stories is also just a great way to kind of like, do market research in a way to really understand which of your stories have great characters and which of the stories you might want to turn into maybe like a full-length novel or a series?
Oh, I definitely agree. Well, it's just like we were talking about Isaac Marion, like his big breakthrough novel came from him writing a short story. And that's actually incredibly common. You'll pick up something where you're like, hey, like, I don't know if this is a good idea, but I'm gonna dabble in it for a while. And you realize readers are really responding to it. You're writing it in a way that doesn't feel like ripping your own teeth out. You can really find new things that you wouldn't take chances on. So that's always really fun. And you're right, it's exactly like market research. You'll figure out what sells and what doesn't. And sometimes that's a realization that people don't want. Like I work with so many writers and I'm one of these people. Like all I want to do is write really weird, like sci-fi bullshit. Like that makes me happy inside. But my stuff that sells really well is like gritty political memoirs, which is unfortunate, but you learn more about the industry and you learn how to pull those elements in. So is there a way to take this gritty political angle and have some science on the side? Because at the end of the day, any writer that tells you they write for themselves and they don't care what other people think is lying. You write because you have something that you want to say. And if you want to say something, you need people to hear that. Like, we want to change people's minds. We want to make people feel less lonely, or to touch them in some way, or just to entertain the hell out of them. And to do that, you need to keep your reader in mind. You need to make sure that you're actually communicating ideas correctly to them. And short stories will teach you how to do that.
That's awesome. Very cool. So what are some of the, biggest either mistakes or kind of misconceptions that new authors have when they come to you?
The most common misconception is, if my reader didn't understand it, my reader is not smart enough. I've felt this way. It's a very terrible, stupid thing. But especially people that are doing ambitious stuff with their work, it's just a ludicrous amount of ego. Like the tantrums that our writers will throw, they're just so impressive. I shouldn't be telling you this, but we just keep them like on record. And then we go back and we get really amused about them being like, you don't understand me. A prominent author one time told me I had talent. We're like, okay, cool. And a couple years later, they'll come back and they'll be like, hey, got my ass handed to me. I'm sorry. Like, can we go back to the process? And we're like, sure, come on in. And I've gone through that. Like, I was such a diva with my first book. But that's the biggest thing you have to learn is you can be wrong. You can be fallible. If at the end of the day, someone is reading your work and they're not connecting to it or they don't understand what's happening, you're failing them. They're not failing you. And you kind of get your ass handed to you in that way. And then you get back up and you realize, okay, I'm going to grow from this. I'm going to learn and I'm going to step forward. And after you take that step, things get so much easier. And to follow that line, a very easy way to identify a new writer is by the way it's written in terms of how abusive they're being with the thesaurus and like clauses. It's the easiest thing to do is to identify a new writer by how grandiose the writing is, because someone will be smart enough to be able to use big words or to use really complicated metaphors or similes. And instead of kind of toning that down and, waiting to throw just one solid punch, they're just plummeting you the entire time. And it's almost unreadable, but they think they're very, very smart. And so that's always a very common, really good new writer thing is to go in and have to be like, okay, I see your ideas are good, but you need to pull back 90%. And I would say about half the writers, that's when the tantrum's thrown and then they step out. But there's another half that says, okay, I see that. And then they come back, and that's right when they're on the mark of really writing well, is they have every single piece of literary power at their fingertips and they know when not to use it. So that's a very common issue. We see a lot of people trying to put too much into one story, which is a very common new writer thing, which is this belief that like, I only have this one thing to write, so I have to put everything I believe into it. Lots of different plots, lots of different characters, a whole bunch of different ideologies, when at the end of the day, the simple stories are the ones that work. And a lot of that just comes from, like I said, it's a fear of new writers believing that they have one shot. And that's not true. If you're a good writer, you're going to have as many shots as you want. So just have one thing, have only a couple characters, like, especially in short works. We can only really identify 3 things. So when writers learn to tone that down and really just be simple and come at it from the point of just a storyteller, someone sitting at a pub and telling another person a story about their day, that's the best writing. So you kind of have to get so egotistical and grandiose that you're terrible before you become good again. It's a weird cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely noticed that as well. And one of the things I've noticed a lot with especially fiction authors is that, they're so interested in the ideological, ideas that they want to, give to the reader in their book that it almost can like be overpowering, and you lose track of the story just to hear about this ideology that maybe the reader doesn't even really care about.
And I see that so often with people that have like literary theory degrees. Like you can tell what someone majored in at university from reading their work. Like it's so easy. But anyone who's doing just kind of crazy, insane things with your narrative to a point that it overshadows it, you're like, okay, that person definitely read Dostoevsky and Derrida. Like they think they're going to be the new person that uses language to like break through the fourth wall. They need to calm down, because at that point, you're sitting in class every day and your professors are telling you, why Dickens is so brilliant by these super technical aspects. And as a budding writer, you think, okay, the only way I'm going to be brilliant is if I do really technical shit. And at the end of the day, you forget that what you're doing is you're just telling a story. And I've certainly fallen into that trap. So yeah, I mean, that's the biggest advice I give to any new writer is don't forget why you're doing this. Think about the books that you read that made you want to be a writer. Especially when you're young, the things that really captured your imagination. I love Don DeLillo, but no one is like, I read Don DeLillo when I was 17 and it made me want to write a novel. Like, think about the things that really captured you and always write from that angle, right? From just sitting down and telling a good story. Because if you let the ego get in and the technical aspects and your mastery over language, that's going to kill the story. That stuff should sneak in when you're kind of not paying attention.
Gotcha. Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that. I mean, I've read my fair share of manuscripts with just so many big words and words I had to look up constantly, and I'm like, if I have to constantly look up words, then the readers are constantly looking up words too, except for
Yeah.
the. So yeah, I mean, and it also kind of makes sense too, because I mean, if you think about like the average writer is probably more educated, more well read than the average reader. And
Mhm.
so, it's just, if you're a great writer, you're going to be very well educated. You're going to be very intelligent. You're going to know lots of words, but it doesn't mean you have to use all these huge words that other people really won't understand. I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, it's about, telling your story. And if the reader can't understand it, they get lost and they don't get the story.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, you look at someone like Dickens. I love Dickens. We all know if Dickens were published now, he would not be published. Any agent would be like, I'm sorry, this is 1,200 words and you don't have any plot until page 200. I don't think it's going to fly. And a lot of that is because we've changed as a readership. We are the Twitter generation, which means that we need to get information as quickly as possible. I mean, just open up a book that was published 20 years ago and look how dense the paragraphs are, and then open up any book on the debut list. Like, we use short paragraphs now, and that doesn't necessarily mean we are a stupider readership. In a lot of ways, I think modern fiction is pushing boundaries in a way that we have never done before. But it does mean readers aren't patient. Like, if you're going to say something, you need to kind of trick them into it. And that's a whole other fun, sneaky thing. But the point is, if by the first couple pages, if there's not a character firmly in someone's head, and if they're not gripping the sides of the book, you're not even going to take an incredibly smart, astute reader and carry them through 300, 400 pages. We're a different generation now. So you have to put the story first. It's the only way you're going to be able to punch them in the face with the ideology on page 150.
Yeah. So what do you mean by tricking the reader into understanding the ideas?
Well, what I particularly like about kind of the new movement we're having in publishing is the idea that we get pulled into something that seems like a mainstream blockbuster. Like, because all we're going to do apparently is talk about Warm Bodies. Look at Warm Bodies. It's a YA book. It's so digestible, it's ridiculous. You sit in and you're like, okay, there's a weird zombie romance. And you go in with absolutely no guard up, because you're like, this is a kind of frivolous, stupid thing I'm almost embarrassed to be reading. And then by the end of it, you're crying hysterically. And you're like, oh my God, like, is what humanity really built around is art? I mean, that's crazy. He pushed this huge idea about the difference between surviving and thriving and what really makes us human under a ridiculous, campy theme. So you had people completely being taken off their guard by it. And we look at someone like Don DeLillo. I never go into a Don DeLillo book unguarded. I'm always like, I bet this will be an interesting reflection about terrorism and globalization, because it is. But if you can take a book that, comes in under a weird apocalyptic theme or something that seems genre-esque, another one of our writers, Emily St. John Mandel, who wrote Station 11, I mean, that's a ridiculous book about a post-apocalyptic world with a Shakespearean troupe that travels around, and like the intertwining thread is a comic book. That's ridiculous. But the end of it, you were like, oh my God, I understand huge themes that she was trying to purport. And that's because she didn't go in egotistical. She didn't go in slapping you with ideas. She went in and said, here's a really interesting world. I bet you're going to have a really fun time reading it. And at the end, you're changed. And that's a beautiful, amazing thing that fiction can do and nonfiction can do. But if your very first paragraph is, sit down and be ready to learn things, that's not going to work. But if it's like, oh my God, explosion and naked women, different. Like, definitely go for explosions and naked women.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just makes sense, right? It's like, watching a movie. If if the first 15 minutes is just boring, you're just going to turn it off and you're going to do something else.
Yeah.
And, no matter how great the ideas are, if there's no story, you're not going to get involved. It's the same way in a book. And, when I look at books now, it's like if the first 2-3 pages doesn't grab me, it's like, I know this needs work. I know something needs to be done to really make it just grab the reader immediately.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times authors think that that's somehow selling themselves out. And it's not. Like we talked about earlier, at the end of the day, if you have any goodness, I need more tea. If you have something important to say, you want people to hear it. So you have to figure out how to get them to hear it. And it's the same with any kind of communication. It's the same with teaching. You need to find a way to relate to people if you're really going to get them to understand something or take a chance on an idea. So yeah, if you're a new writer and you're thinking, you know, I'm gonna start out really slow, but it's gonna be really meaningful when you get to da-da-da. No. Like, if you sit some people down and you watch them read the draft of your book and they start yawning or looking away or checking Facebook, you have done this wrong. Like, they need to be gripping the side of those pages like their lives depend on them, or at least just incredibly engrossed or excited, or you're going to lose people, especially as a debut novelist. You know, Neil Gaiman put something out and I'm kind of bored the first 50 pages. I'm going to trust him because he's amazing and I know that he's doing something sneaky. But a brand new writer, I'm going to wonder how the hell he got that publishing deal. So it's about trust. It's about building. And with the first book, you need to make sure that you're really pulling people in because they're going to be so skeptical. Same with short fiction, whole thing. You know, in the beginning, just pull them in. And then after you have their trust, you can do anything with your readers. But it's kind of that first step.
Absolutely. So I know one of the big, really important things for writers is to write a really good blurb, right? Maybe their book description on Amazon or for a query letter or pitching a story, right? Can you give us any good tips on writing a great blurb and how do you think about that process?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different strategies for writing query letters. And because all agents are different, obviously, there's no surefire sort of thing that works. What I found has the most success, both in my writing and in the authors that we help get agents, is to always start out with a plot description. Don't start with, hi, my name is yada, 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 or this is a, 100,000 page mystery novel. Just start out with your first line, Chris Hentley thought that nothing could ever penetrate his small world, and then there was a hamster. Whatever your opening line is, always establish setting with your first sentence, and then introduce conflict with your second, and then introduce a twist with your third. That's usually a good thing to do. Another formula works really well is who. Answer the question, who is your main character? What does he or she want? Why does he or she want it? And then always, always, always in every query letter, put in consequences for the character. I see this so often with people that are querying, especially genre work, is they're like, here's this big world and there's time travel and all this stuff, but I don't understand what the consequences are for my main character. If your main character is hurled on a crazy adventure across different dimensions, I want to know what that main character wants. Does he want to return back to his normal life? Does he want to get the girl? Does he need to, master this quest so his world doesn't die? I need to know that there's something that matters on an individual level, because that's what gets people to read, is they care about the characters. So if I don't care about your character, if I don't know what's at stake in the query letter, I'm going to throw that away. So don't get so caught up in the big world and the big plot that you forget that at the end of the day, we're reading about a person, or maybe two people, no more than three people. And we need to care about them. So I always try to end the hook, instead of making the hook about the plot or like, and the worlds will disappear, always try to make the hook about the character. That works. A lot of agents are super character driven. Make sure you research the sex of the agent before you write Mr. or Mrs. Very upsetting. And do Miss, not Mrs. Never be longer than a page. That's a pretty good mark. Try to get in as much publishing credit as you can. Always super helpful. Never make suggestions about what kind of release you think you can have. Don't be presumptuous in any way. Not like, I think it will be a bestseller. Never say that. Never say it has great film potential. No. Just be humble.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, it's so upsetting. And like
any good story is going to have film potential. That's how it works. It's a good story.
Yeah. So like when I was talking about a lot of the big film deals that our authors have gotten, I see that constantly where I'm like, you wrote a gorgeous book about the slave trade in Ghana, and your query letter makes me want to punch you in the face. Like, you have talked about a possible casting for who you want the film to be. And like, what are you doing? You are a well-educated, beautiful, thoughtful writer. Where did this come from? And it'll always be like, I Googled this thing and I saw it. I'm like, no. Like, agents, of course, are looking to make money. That's how the industry works. But they've dedicated their life to stories because they believe in stories. It's always good to appear marketable. You have your publishing credit. They're definitely going to Google what your social media following is. That's very important for marketing. But they don't need you to tell them how to do their jobs. In fact, it makes them very angry. So just be humble, have a very good, concise sort of thing, add in publishing credit, thank them at the end, tell them the word count. Never query a book where it's not completed. That's definitely going to shoot yourself in the foot. Aside from that, write it for several months over and over again, and it will be kind of harder than the novel, but have your friends read it and it'll be fine.
Definitely. So this has been amazing, Dan. I really appreciate all the great information you've been sharing with us. And I want to make sure that everyone listening knows where they can find out even more and learn about your educational programs and the free editing program and all that. So can you give us a little more details on where to find all that great stuff?
Yeah, of course. So tetheredbyletters.com will give you everything. That's where you can find out about our education programs, community. It's where you can buy our very, very beautiful journal. But it's also where you can submit to the free editing program or to our contests. So that's all there. Currently, we're running a really awesome Kickstarter for the new collection of Friction. It's Friction number 5, and the Kickstarter is also on the website because we totally learned how to embed a video the other day. It was very exciting. And by we learned, I mean someone else did it for us after we broke the website. But yeah, so essentially we're just trying to get the super beautiful collection out into more hands. But yeah, it's all there. It's very straightforward, and you can always email us or stalk us on social media. We do love that.
Awesome. And so how can people, if they want to support your organization and the great work that you do, how can they donate? Can they volunteer? What other things can we do to support you guys and your mission?
Well, we love donations. That's super exciting, like more ramen noodles for the whole staff. We have a cool Friends program, which is essentially a tiered donation program where you get cool stuff. Like, we give you behind the scenes access into a lot of the stuff we do. If you are in Colorado during April, do come to our gala. It will be fabulous. We'll all learn how to wear like pencil heels and not choke on ridiculously expensive hors d'oeuvres, which will be very fun. You can definitely get involved with kind of our Kickstarters and that sort of thing. We also hire interns 3 times a year. We love interns. We even pay some of them, which is crazy. Like, not a lot, but another, ramen noodle fund. So yeah, if you're interested in kind of breaking into the industry and giving back and reading really good literature for a living, that's always a good option. And other than that, just come to our events. Like, we love when people come. We drink beer, we yell about poetry. There's a lot of pretentious like steampunk Shakespeare stuff happening for no reason. So that's fun. Yeah, just get involved, read our books, hang out with us. We're kind of not terribly awkward people, but with enough beer, I feel like you'll find us very likable.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dani. And all the links you mentioned will be in the show notes at publishingprofitspodcast.com. So definitely check that out to get connected with Dani and her amazing organization, Tethered by Letters. So thanks so much, Dani. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us, Tom.